Let's pray. Father, we pray that you would open our eyes to wondrous things out of your law. Pray that we would take these things into our hearts and apply them to our lives. And these things I pray in Jesus' name. Amen. So, a year ago, my granddaughter was standing at the edge of the pool. I was in the pool, and she was on the edge, standing there. She didn't know how to swim, and what was I trying to tell her to do? Jump to me. Take a jump right here. Now, a year later, she knows how to, tread water. She knows how to float on her back. She knows how to swim underwater. She's almost 5 years old. And she doesn't use a floaty. She's out there without the floaty. But it's all because of that first step, because she was there. And why do you think I couldn't get her to jump? She was afraid, and she apparently didn't trust me, okay? I was back a ways, but apparently she didn't trust me. She was afraid, but finally, somehow she came over her fear, got over her fear, and she jumped into the water. Well, here's the thing. For Christians, it's been said a number of times in the New Testament, the just shall live by faith. The just shall live by faith. You become a Christian by faith, but then you live the Christian life by faith. And for so many of us, we find ourselves standing on the edge of the pool, right? We've put our trust in Christ, but now to actually take a risk, to step out there, because Jesus gave us an assignment, right? He said to go into all the world and preach the gospel to everyone, make disciples, grow them in their faith, teaching them all that I've commanded you, and I'm with you. He's gave us that command. We know that, and yet we're standing on the edge of the pool, and the question is, what is it that we need to do in order to step off the edge, to trust Christ, to live a life of risk, because we believe in the gospel? Now, we're about to start a sermon series on 1 Corinthians. And 1 Corinthians is about the anatomy of the church. It's about the church body and getting the church body to function right. As a matter of fact, Paul spent more time with first and second two letters to Corinthians about that church than any other church that he talked about. He was really invested that they learn to function as a body together, so that they could be following Christ, their head, in reaching the people around them for the gospel. But before we get into that, which will be next week, we need to stop and say, how is it that this church was born? How was this church planted? And how did the people of this church learn to walk in faith, to step out and take risks? Because all of us have that same assignment. We need to walk by faith. We need to step out and take a risk so that God can come through for us. So how did that happen? If you turn in your Bibles to the book of Acts, chapter 18, we will see how that happened. It tells us, Acts chapter 18, starting with verse 1, it tells us in the book of 1 Corinthians, 5 years later, when Paul wrote back to the people at Corinth, that he said, when I first came here to Corinth, I came with fear and trembling. Okay? He first came to Corinth with fear and trembling. And I could understand why he might feel that way. Because, you see, Paul had received a call by God to go to Macedonia. And he went to 3 cities in Macedonia. And every city he got ran out of. 2 of the cities he had to escape for his life from. So stepping out and taking risks for God didn't always pay off physically for him. It was a tough thing. And now he's going to Corinth. And Corinth was the 3rd largest city in all of Rome. It was about 200,000 people. So it was about the size of Antioch and Brentwood and Pittsburgh put together. Maybe a little smaller than that, but about 200,000 people. And it was a main population area because there were 2 bodies of water that were separated. And this small 3.5 mile area, they used to drag ships across that area, right, to get from one port to the other port. And so it was a lot of commerce going there. But not only that, but this was a city that was filled with idolatry. As a matter of fact, they had a temple built for this goddess named Aphrodite, right? And it had 1,000 prostitutes that worked outside this temple to show you what kind of a place it was. And so if you called somebody a Corinthian, that meant that you had no sexual morals. That's just the way it was. So Paul, when he's entering this city, can you imagine entering a city where you know no one that is a Christian, and you're there to bring the gospel, right? And so that's what Paul was doing. You could see why he entered with fear and trembling. And so he steps out, and as we talk about what happens here, I want to point out some things that you can do, some things that you can learn from what Paul did to give you some tools so that you can actually step out in faith, being able to take risks for the gospel. So here's Paul. And it says in verse 1, after these things, Paul departed from Athens and went to Corinth. There he was. He gets off the ship, he steps into Corinth, all by himself. And it says this, and he found a certain Jew named Aquila, born in Pontus, who had recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius had commanded all the Jews to depart from Rome. And he came to them. So because he was of the same trade, he stayed with them and worked, for by occupation they were tent makers. And he reasoned in the synagogue every Sabbath and persuaded both Jews and Greeks. So the first thing I want you to know is, if you are actually going to do this, because I'm actually going to give you an assignment this week to step out in faith for the gospel, if you're actually going to do this, one of the things that you need is brothers and sisters that are like-minded. So he steps into Corinth and looks, and out of all these people, he manages to find these two people that were there, Aquila and Priscilla. And they took him in. They let him stay with him. And so they had some skin in the game, okay? So they were saying, okay, we're willing to go along with you. And they happened to be tent makers too. Paul was a tent maker. They were tent makers, right? And so they were all out amongst the people. You know, a lot of times when people get through Bible college and seminary, they really haven't had any experience out there with people. They're just kind of stay in that cloistered seminary environment. And so sometime, years, decades from now, when you have a new pastor, I would recommend that you have one that has some experience out in the world, right, before he comes in to work in the church. And even then, you need to be out there. Think about Jesus, right? He spent some time in the synagogues, right? But he spent a lot of times by the water, on the road, on the mountains, wherever people were at. It said that he was hanging out with the tax collectors and sinners. And so the first thing we notice is that somehow it's arranged so that two people that are believers end up getting sent out of Rome, and they end up in Corinth, and God puts them together. So one thing you need if you're going to step out and take a risk is you need some other believers who are like-minded to say, yeah, I have the same thing. We're not called to be Lone Rangers, right? Even the Lone Ranger had Tonto. So we're not called to be Lone Rangers. What does it say? So after that, he started going out to the synagogue and trying to persuade both the Jews and Greeks. Verse 5. When Silas and Timothy had come from Macedonia, Paul was compelled by the Spirit to testify to the Jews that Jesus is the Christ. He started out with one, right? Barely after he got off the boat, he had three. Now Silas and Timothy, he'd been waiting. They came. And we find in other places that they brought a gift with them. So here he's working, and now he finds that they brought a gift from some other churches, so he can start spending all his time out with people sharing the gospel. So it started out with one. Then it was two. Two more. How much does that make? 4 plus Paul. 5. All of a sudden there's 5. We have some momentum going because he was able to step out in faith. And the two things that we notice is that he joined like-minded believers who had some skin in the game. They cared about it. And they were also ready to invest in his vision to make disciples, to reach people for Christ in Corinth. If you're going to do this week, don't do it by yourself. Okay? Find some brothers and sisters that will team with you. Second thing it says here in verse 6. But when they opposed him and blasphemed him, he shook his garments and said to them, your blood be on your own heads. I am clean. From now on I will go to the Gentiles. And he departed from there. So the second thing here, the first thing is you've got to get some other believers. You've got to team together. Don't be a lone ranger. And the second thing is be ready to react to the circumstances that come your way. Be ready to react to the circumstances that come your way. So he goes to the synagogue, right? And what happens now? They start to oppose him. As a matter of fact, they say, out of here, right? We don't want your message. They started blaspheming. And so here's the first thing you have to react to. You have to react to closed doors. You know, God is preparing people to hear the gospel. But some doors you go to, they might be closed, right? So here's my first advice for you in being ready to react. Don't try to go through closed doors, right? You can hurt yourself that way, right? Don't try to go through closed doors. So he said, okay, fine. If you don't want the gospel, and he takes his coat off and he shakes the dust out. He was kind of doing what Jesus said. Jesus said, if people reject your message, then take your shoes, shake the dust off your shoes. He was shaking it off his coat. And basically he was saying, okay, right now, apparently this door is not open. So if for some reason, you reject Christ, you continue to reject Christ, your blood is on your own head. Because I'm not looking for the closed door. I'm not going to go through a closed door. So be ready to react to a closed door by not going through it. So he stops going to the synagogue, he leaves, and what happens next? In verse 7, it says, and he departed from there and entered the house of a certain man named Justus. And entered the house of a certain man named Justus, one who worshiped God, whose house was next door to the synagogue. Okay, so he leaves the synagogue. Does anybody have you? Let's see. Look what it says there. Whose house was joined hard to the synagogue. His house was San Francisco style, right? There's no space. He had his house, this house for Justus was right up against the synagogue. So he leaves one door, right? And he goes in the next door. Is that crazy? Right there, God had prepared someone who was ready to accept him in. This guy, Justus, in other places he's called Gaius. He ended up being one of the main helpers of Paul. But it was right there. So isn't that crazy? He let the one door go, but when he saw an opportunity. So the second thing about being ready to respond is when you see an open door, go through it. He goes through that door. And now all these people going to the synagogue, what are they seeing? Yeah, they're seeing him and they're seeing Paul right there. Hey guys, you going in there? How about in here? They started to get, God set it up so they were right by the synagogue, right? And here's what happens. So now we got Justus, right? That's number 6. It says, then in verse 8, Crispus, the ruler of the synagogue, believed on the Lord. Okay, that makes 7, right? If my adding is right, maybe more. The leader of the synagogue, he's been leading the synagogue, and he sees that he's kicked out. He goes, wait a minute, I want what he's got. And so the leader of the synagogue believes on the Lord and all his household. Okay, now we've got his household. We've got Aquila and Priscilla. We've got Timothy and Silas. We've got Justus, and now we've got Crispus, and now we've got all his household. And many of the Corinthians hearing believed and were baptized. Now many of the Corinthians, we've got a movement going on here. All because he decided 2 things so far. Well, he'd already decided it. You know what? I'm going to live by faith, which means I'm going to Corinth. And I'm going to find like-minded people. And then number 2, when I see a closed door, I'm not going to go in it. When I see an open door that God's opened, I'm going to step in it. I'm going to have to step out and do something. I'm going to have to believe God is going to do something. And all of a sudden, we've got a movement going here. We have to look at our own situation too. In our lives, there are places that doors are shut, that we can't go in sometimes, right? And there are other doors that are open. And we might not understand what God is doing, but God is doing something. And we're saying, okay, if there's an open door, maybe God is doing something, and we better listen. We better go through the open door. I don't know why that's closed off and this is open, but things like that happen. God has a plan. I look at our congregation and say, in the last, 8-10 months, we've added a couple pastors that are studying in the congregation among us. Not to mention the Spanish pastor. We've got 4 of us. I don't know what God's doing, but we better be ready for something because He might be opening some kind of door for us. Was it just a coincidence that we have a Filipino pastor one morning, and that night a couple come that are from the same village that he's from? I don't know what God's doing, but there might be some kind of door. And you know what we better say? If God opens the door, we better walk through it, right? If God opens the door, we better walk through it. Okay, so we've talked about 2 things so far. We've talked about like-minded people, if you're going to step out in faith. And we've talked about looking for opportunities when doors close and when doors open. But if we go on, it says in verse 9, now the Lord spoke to Paul. You guys have those hardback King James Bibles there? Pick them up. And I want you to open to page 1723. So if you got one of those Bibles, open to 1723. Okay? You're looking at 1723, right? How many people got it? Okay. A few people got it. Still looking? Okay. As you look at 1723, look at that page. Does anything jump out at you? What jumps out at you? There's red in the middle of that. There's red in the middle of that page? Wait a minute. Are you sure? Because that means Jesus' words, right? And Jesus was back in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. That's when He spoke, right? But there's red in the middle of that page? Are you trying to tell me that even after Jesus went up to heaven, He still speaks to people? Whoa. So red in the middle, I guess if there's red in there, we better see what the red says. Okay, it doesn't mean that you've read it. It means that you need to read it if it's red. So here it says, the Lord spoke to Paul in a night vision. Now, remember, they didn't have the Bible like we did. Paul was writing the Bible at the time, right? He was one of the authors of the Bible through the Holy Spirit. They didn't have the Bible, so we can go to the Bible to listen to God, but also when you pray, praying just isn't just talking, right? It's not telling God everything, right? He probably already knows it. So another part of prayer is listening, okay? God, what do you want to say to me? Listen. See where God is trying to challenge you or speak to you. And so here Paul gets a vision at night. And here's what it says. Now the Lord spoke to Paul in a night vision. Do not be afraid, but speak and do not keep silent. For I am with you, and no one will attack you to hurt you. This sounds just like Jesus, right? He says, don't be afraid, okay? Do not be afraid. I'm with you. I mean, that's in the Great Commission. I am with you always. You see all kinds of times in the Gospels, Jesus says, don't be afraid. So this sounds like Jesus, and Paul is recognizing Jesus is talking to me here. He may have been ready to quit at that point. You know, it was too much. He was getting discouraged, and all of a sudden he gets a word from the Lord. And the word from Jesus is, don't be afraid. You will be safe. I will take care of you. Okay? Ladies and gentlemen, if you're ready to take a risk, to step out there and say, I'm going to believe God, and I'm going to try to share my faith with somebody this week, you know what Jesus says? Don't be afraid. Do not be afraid. And the second thing He says is, speak up. Go ahead and speak up. Don't be afraid. Speak up. And so I'm going to have you practice something right now. We're about halfway through our sermon, but you still need to practice this, okay? What I want you to practice, He says, is 5 words that says, the just shall live by faith. 6 words, excuse me. The just shall live by faith. I'm going to give you another 6 words, okay? Here are the words. Have you ever heard the gospel? Have you ever heard the gospel? Say it. One more time. Okay, now I want you to say it 3 times to the person next to you. Okay, practice it. Okay. Very good. I heard the emphasis on different words. I'm glad to hear you can say that. The just shall live by faith. Jesus says, don't be afraid. He already said, get a team around you. He said, look for opportunities. Don't go through closed doors. Go through open doors. And now he says, don't be afraid. So what you need to do is listen to the word. Listen to the word of Jesus and obey it. Don't be afraid. Speak up. Speak up. And so this week, here's the thing you can do. If you could possibly get those 6 words out of your mouth with somebody that you think needs to hear it this week, that's stepping out on faith. 6 words out of your mouth is the same thing as stepping in the pool, right? 6 words, and what are the words together? Have you ever heard the gospel? Right. Okay, you might be saying, well, what happens after that? Because they'll say no, and then what do I do? If you need some help, see me. See Fred. See Mark. See Doug. Doug's got a whole different way to present the gospel. He'll share it with you. See Don, okay? And the other Don. They've got another way to share the gospel. See one of us. Otherwise, you might already have it down. You just need to get those words out of your mouth. Pray. Look for the opportunity because Jesus says, don't be afraid. I'm going to protect you. And speak the gospel. Speak the gospel because that's what we're about. Don't worry. All of the lessons in 1 Corinthians are not going to be, that we're going to go from here on, are not going to be about sharing your faith, okay? But this week is, okay? So, that's just the first half of what he said. He said, so we need to respond to the Lord by hearing his words, hearing and obeying his words. And then the second half of that verse is found right here. It says, for I'm with you, verse 10, for I'm with you, and no one will attack you, and no one will hurt you. Second half of the verse, for I have many people in the city. Okay, the second thing we need to respond to is not only the words of Christ, to obey them, but the heart of Christ. Why does he say he wants to do that? Just so that we can get us out there and make us feel scared and risky out there? No, he's doing that because he says, I have many people in this city. It's like they're out there, but you have to find them. So you don't want to waste too much time on one. You have to go find. My daughter, 29 years old, she plays this game. You guys might know it. I bet most of you don't, though. I don't know. It's called Pokemon Go. You heard of that? Okay. Any of the adults heard of that? Okay. All right. Well, it was the big rave a while back, but now it's coming back. And what happens is you have to go out in your city, wherever you're driving, you're looking on your phone, and it'll pop up a location of one of these what are they? Just Pokemon, but they're different characters, right? And some are worth more than others. And at 29, I thought you'd be past it. But no, she says it's a new thing, right? And like now, it's groups of 50 people show up. It's not just on your own. It's like you're competing with other people to find these Pokemon. And they were actually at our church. There was a Pokemon on our property recently. And there was a bunch of people. I was wondering what was happening there. Pokemon. Everybody's after them, right? Okay. Jesus says, not Pokemon. He says, I have people out there. I have people for you to reach. Okay? So don't give up. Speak up because I have people for you to reach. And I know it's going to be risky because who knows how somebody's going to react if you say, have you heard the gospel? You don't know, but he has people out there. Some of them might say, no, and I don't want to. Others might say, no, what is it? There's people out there. Okay? And God came up with a way to reach those people. He could have came up with all kinds of ways to reach people, but instead he came up with one way. One way. You. That's it. He doesn't have a backup plan. So if we, people, believers, don't reach those people, they don't get reached because that's his plan. It's the plan and the backup plan. Okay? It may not be you. Maybe you miss out on the opportunity and someone else does, but he's using people to reach other people because he has them out there. Review. So far we said we need together with like-minded believers who have a vision, okay? Second thing, we need to look for opportunities, and those opportunities could be closed doors that we need to walk away from and open doors that maybe we don't understand but we walk through. Thirdly, we need to be looking for a chance to respond to the word of Jesus by listening and obeying and by having the heart of Christ, which is a heart which he said what his heart was himself when he was looking over Jerusalem, and he wept because he says they're like chicks that I can't gather in. He said, I've come to save and seek and to save the lost. That was his heart. He wants us to have that same heart. So finally, the last thing that you can do this week, at least that I'm getting from this passage, is to raise your expectations. Raise your expectations. I'll explain that as I read this verse. We're looking at verse 12 now. It says, when Gallio was proconsul in Achaia, the Jews with one accord rose up. I forgot to read the last part of the other verse. And he continued there for a year and 6 months, teaching the word of God among them. So for a year and 6 months, he was just going full bore. He was doing what God wanted him to do. Other people were stepping out. Disciples were being made. And then verse 14. Or verse 12. When Gallio was proconsul at Achaia, the Jews with one accord rose up against Paul and brought him to the judgment seat, saying, this fellow persuades people to worship God contrary to the law. So here's this guy Gallio, right? He's new as the proconsul, but this guy is a big guy, right? He's famous. But I mean, he's high in the government. He was everybody knew him. If he made a judgment on something, it happened, right? It wasn't like just a lower court judge, right? If he said something, it happened. So they all got together, okay? So here's the first expectation. There's two expectations I want you to notice, because if you're going to step out on faith, you need to have this first expectation, and that is this. You're going to have opposition. Okay? You're going to run into a buzzsaw. You're going to have trouble. Something's going to happen. You know why? Because there's not only there's God, but there's the God of this world, Satan. And he can ignore everybody at this church, not have any problem, unless you decide to live by faith. Unless you decide to say 5 words, what are they? Have you heard? If you decide to do that, you've got his attention, right? If you decide to do that, he wants to trip you up. And so you're going to have an opponent. You're going to have opposition. And so here was the opposition. They brought Paul to court. He's now standing there. He was probably shaking and trembling again, because it's not easy to stand in front of a judge, let alone a judge of that stature. I know, as your pastor, I hate to tell you this, but I stood before a judge this week. Yeah, it was Monday, right? I went in, feeling good, day after my birthday, going to the judge, I'm feeling, and then when I get in there, all of a sudden, well, it's full of people, right? And of course, they call Ashcraft first. So I have to stand up in front of the judge. And they told me there's 2 judges, one's more lenient than the other. The guy is not lenient and the woman is lenient. So it was the woman judge there. So and she said, well, what's your case? I stated in my case how really I didn't deserve that ticket, right? Because I had stopped and looked both ways, told the whole thing to her. And you know what she said to me? Guilty. Next. That was it. When the judge says something, it happens, right? And so they go before the judge. And Paul is probably thinking, this may be the end of my ministry. This guy has got a lot of power. I don't know what God's going to do, but this may be the end. I'm just commentating there. It doesn't actually say that in the text, but I'm thinking he said that. So, and when Paul was about to open his mouth, verse 14, Gallio said to the Jews. So Paul's right. He's about ready to say something, and Gallio, the judge, interrupts. And here's what he says. If it were a matter of wrongdoing or wicked crimes or Jews, there would be reason why I should bear with you. But if it's a question of words about the names and your own law, look to it yourselves, for I don't want to judge such matters. What? And he drove them out of the judgment seat. Right? Here's Paul. He's thinking, oh man, what's going to happen here? I've stepped out in faith. All of a sudden, this judge who is, he says, hey, you don't have any right to come in here and ask. This is a frivolous lawsuit you're bringing here. These guys have the right to do what they want, to say what they want. All of a sudden now, it's turned around, right? Paul can go out of there. He can talk about Christianity all he wants. They have to slither back into the shadows. As a matter of fact, they were driven out. God turned it around. So the second thing I want you to know, the first one about expectation is expect opposition. But the second one is even more important. Expect the hand of God to do what only the hand of God could do. We can do all we want, but until God does something, it doesn't really happen. And this, all of a sudden, not only here, this wasn't just affecting Corinth. Wherever he went for at least a few years, it was open because he had made this ruling. And now Christians, they have their rights. All of a sudden, they were given status. So there you have it. These are the ways. These are the 4 ways that we can step out by faith. We can gather together with like-minded believers. We can look for opportunities to not go through closed doors, but to go through open doors. We can have expectations from God's word that we hear it and that we hear what it says and obey it, and also that we gain God's heart. And finally, we can have expectations that there's going to be opposition. If you're ready for it, it won't blow you away, right? Because you'll know that your God is greater. And second, that God can do only what God could do. And he will do that for us. So it finishes up this way in verse 16. Or verse 17. Then all the Greeks took Sosthenes, the ruler of the synagogue, and beat him before the judgment seat. But Gallio took no notice of these things. Let's look at this. Remember the name Sosthenes. Can you remember that? Everybody say it. Sosthenes. Okay, we'll come back to him in a second. But here's what I want you to notice. What are the odds that all of these events would happen? 2 weeks ago, my wife and I went to San Francisco, and we were doing a City Serve project where we're supposed to be helping poor people and stuff like that. And they had a drawing, right? And the drawing was you win $1,000 to give to the charity of your choice if you get picked. 1,800 people there, right? 1,800 people. What are the odds of my wife being picked? You think it's 1 in 1,800. That's what I would have thought, but no, it's 1 in 1. It's 1 in 1. Because if God wants something to happen, guess what? It happens, no matter how many people there are there, right? So I'm just thinking about what happened here. Paul goes to this city he's never been to before, that Christianity hasn't been to before. And what are the odds that this guy, Aquila and Priscilla, would have been ordered out of Rome and have to be there and end up there the same time he's there, so he's got somebody to greet him and give him a place to live? What are the odds? And then Silas and Timothy. He was waiting for them, right? Because they were going to converge there. But what's the odds when they get there, they have a bunch of money to give Paul so he doesn't have to work as a tent maker? What's the odds of that? And then this guy Justus, the guy that's next door, right? Okay, not somewhere, he gets kicked out of the synagogue. He goes away from there. And next door is this guy that's ready to accept the gospel. Or what about the guy that was in charge of the synagogue? I forgot his name. Remember his name? No, not Sosthenes, the guy before him. Yeah, not Crispus, that's it. Crispus, he's in charge of the synagogue. He decides to believe. A bunch of other people decide to believe also. This is crazy. And then what are the odds that Paul is actually going to get a vision, a word from Jesus himself? Jesus, back with the other guys. Paul's this... but he does, right at the time he needs it, when he's about ready to quit. And then this guy Gallio. What's the odds that the judge is going to surprise everybody, have them sent out of the synagogue and out of the judgment seat, and make a ruling in favor of Paul? The odds are 1 in 1, because when God does something, no matter how much it seems like it's not going to happen, it can happen. And this guy Sosthenes, it was the new ruler of the synagogue. He got beat, right? Apparently they decided, hey, if you're going to come before us with a frivolous lawsuit, we're going to beat you. Somebody look up 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 1. Bible drill right now. 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 1. Who's got it? Right here. Could you read that for us, Anna? It seems like the same Sosthenes. Everybody knows him, Corinth there, right? This guy that got beat up, the ruler of the synagogue. apparently he's now hanging out with Paul, and he's a brother in... What's the odds? This whole thing is too crazy, right? It's too crazy unless you realize that God does what God can do when we're willing to step out in faith. Sometimes we miss it. Sometimes he's doing it for someone else. But when we step out in faith. And I don't want to... I'm closing right now, I promise. But I don't want to pretend like it's easy. I don't want to pretend like, oh, that's easy, you can't do that. No. You have to depend on God. You know, even forget about that. Just changing a habit. Let's say you want to change a habit. 9 out of 10 people will not be able to say, they have come up with an idea of what they want to do. They will not be able to follow through and do it. It doesn't happen. Some of you remember I told you, I'm going to stop drinking Dr. Pepper, right? I'm not drinking Dr. Pepper anymore. And I was doing pretty good on it for most of the year. I mean, pretty good until my birthday last Sunday. Guess what my daughter gives me for my birthday? Not a Dr. Pepper, 12-pack, ice cold, and not just Dr. Pepper, cherry Dr. Pepper. I've got to tell you, by Thursday they were gone. I had a plan, but I didn't follow through with it. But does that mean I give up on? No, that just means I have a little setback, right? You may have a setback, but that doesn't mean that you don't follow through with the plan. And so my last thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to ask you to envision something. Paul had a vision, right? So I'm going to ask you to envision something. So just close your eyes for a second, okay? And I want you to pretend like it's next Sunday. It's not this Sunday, it's next Sunday. And pretend like you're thinking back on this week. And what you're thinking about is the time or the times you were able to say to someone, have you ever heard the gospel? I want you to pause and think about that. Think about when it might be, who it might be. Think about the fact that God is behind you. God's in front of you. God's above you. God's below you. It's all about what he can do. They say if you can picture something, you're much more likely to do it. I want you to picture that. Keep your eyes closed as we close in prayer. And as we close in prayer, I would just say that there may be some people here today that you've actually never heard that question. Have you heard the gospel? And so if you're one of those people and you've never heard that question, let me explain. All of us are separated from God. All of us. God sent Jesus to die for us because we could not save ourselves. And all we need to do is say, God, I admit I'm a sinner. I can't save myself. I want to put my trust in Jesus to have my sins forgiven, to be part of your family, and to live for you. I need you. If you want to say that today, if you want to pray that today, admit you're a sinner, believe that Jesus died for you, and commit to follow him, raise your hand right now. If you've never done that before and you'd like to do that today. Okay, I see that hand. Anybody else? Yes. God moves even in here. He moves people to himself. Okay, thank you. Let's pray. And let's stand as we pray. Father, we thank you. We thank you that you have not left us alone. You're with us every step of the way, but you want us to believe you. You want us to step out. You want us to take on your mission, not by ourselves, but with you and with those that you put around us. And pray that you would help us to do that this week. These things I pray in Jesus' name.